My name is Elena Martinez. I'm 35 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been the perfect daughter, the understanding sister, the generous aunt, the one who always says yes, the one who pays the bills when no one else can, the one who sacrifices her dreams so others can pursue theirs. But this is the story of how a neighborhood barbecue, a false accusation, and an ambulance changed my life forever. It all began, or rather, it all ended on a July Saturday that smelled of grilled meat and public humiliation. But to understand that moment, I need to take you back years through the labyrinth of disappointments and manipulations that my family built brick by brick until I found myself trapped in a prison of obligations I never chose. I was 23 when my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table of my first apartment, a tiny studio that had cost me blood, sweat, and three simultaneous jobs, and told me, Elena, your brother needs money for his business. You've always been responsible. You understand. It wasn't a question. It never was. I had saved $12,000. Every cent had been a small victory against the gravity that tried to pull me back to the family home, to the dynamic where I was the eternal caregiver, the silent provider, the one who never caused problems. It's just a loan, my brother Carlos assured me, with that smile he'd perfected since childhood, the one that said, trust me while emptying your pockets. In 6 months, I'll pay you back with interest. This is going to take off, Elena, I promise. I gave him the money. I never saw it again. Carlos's business, a restaurant that promised to revolutionize fusion cuisine in our city, closed in 4 months. The walls filled with mold because he didn't pay for maintenance. Suppliers sued him, and when everything collapsed, my mother appeared at my door again. Your brother is devastated. He needs a place to stay. Just a few months, Elena. You understand that family supports each other. Carlos moved into my apartment. He stayed for 2 years. During that time, I learned the true meaning of the word gaslighting, though I didn't know the term then. Every time I mentioned the money, Carlos looked at me with hurt eyes. How can you think about money at a time like this? Can't you see I'm suffering? And my mother added her voice to the chorus. You've always been so materialistic, Elena. Your brother needs you. Where's your compassion? Eventually, I stopped asking about the money. I learned that asking for what mine had made me the villain. My father, a man who had been emotionally absent throughout my entire childhood, but who suddenly discovered my existence when he needed a kidney, died when I was 27, not from the kidney, ironically, but from a massive heart attack while watching a soccer game on the couch. In his will, he left the family home to Carlos and our younger sister, Sophia. To me, he left his debts. But you're the only one with a stable job, explained the family lawyer, as if this were perfectly reasonable logic. Your father trusted that you could handle it. $22,000 in credit card debt, $8,000 in personal loans, $3,500 in overdue medical bills. I paid for it all. It took 3 years. 3 years of living at the minimum, of turning down invitations because I couldn't afford a beer at a bar, of wearing the same clothes until the seams frayed. Meanwhile, Carlos sold the family home for $250,000. He and Sophia split the money. I received nothing. But Dad left you his coin collection, Sophia reminded me, as if 3 dozen foreign coins could compare to $125,000. That was the first time I considered cutting contact with my family, but I didn't, because somewhere deep in my psyche, in that place where the little girls we once were, still live and still hoped to be seen, loved, valued, I still believed that if I tried hard enough, if I gave enough, if I sacrificed enough, eventually my family would love me in the way I needed to be loved. I was wrong. Between 25 and 33, there were 3 men. Marcos was the first, an architect with an easy smile and big dreams. I fell in love with him with the desperate intensity of someone who has been hungry for affection for too long. For 6 months, it was perfect. He brought me coffee in bed. He wrote me terrible but sincere poems. He made me feel seen. Then the suggestions started. Maybe you could dress more femininely. Maybe you could be less intense with your family. Maybe you could smile more. worry less. Maybe you could lend me $5,000 for my design project. I lent him the money. 6 weeks later, I found him in bed with his ex-girlfriend in my apartment, in my sheets of paper, on the mattress I'd bought with overtime hours at the office. This doesn't mean anything, he told me, as if the problem was my interpretation and not his betrayal. I stayed with him for 2 more months. Then came Daniel, sweet, shy Daniel, who worked at a library and read French poetry. Daniel, who never raised his voice, but who could destroy you with his silence. Daniel, who would disappear for days when he was processing emotions, and who trained me to walk on eggshells around his moods. Daniel never asked me for money. He just asked that I pay 80% of everything, food, outings, because he was exploring his career and I clearly had more resources. When I finally ended that relationship after 2 years of feeling invisible, my mother told me, "You've always been so demanding, Elena. Good men don't grow on trees." The third was Roberto. Roberto, who proposed to me after 8 months. Roberto, who seemed stable, secure, normal. Roberto, whose proposal was, "I think we should get married. It makes financial sense, and my parents are pressuring." There was no romance. There was no declared love. Just, it makes sense. I said yes anyway. I planned the wedding myself. I paid most of the expenses, $28,000 in total. My mother insisted on inviting distant cousins. Carlos insisted on being the best man, though he arrived drunk to the rehearsal. Sophia insisted on a specific bridesmaid dress that cost $600. 1 week before the wedding, Roberto called me during his lunch break. "I can't do this," he said simply. "I'm sorry. It's just that I don't love you. I don't think I ever did." He hung up. I lost the deposits. I lost my dignity, having to cancel everything. I lost friends who had taken flights to attend. But what I lost most was the last portion of hope that I could be loved in the simple, honest way. Everyone deserves to be loved. My family never asked how I was. My mother told me, "Well, at least now you can focus on helping your sister. Sophia is thinking about buying a house and needs help with the down payment." I was 33 years old. I was emotionally bankrupt and financially devastated. I had given everything I had and was still being asked to give more. And I did. God, I did. I gave Sophia $8,000 for her down payment, money I withdrew from my retirement fund, paying enormous penalties. "You're the best sister in the world," she told me, hugging me with tears in her eyes. 2 months later, she bought a new car for $35,000 and blocked me on social media when I asked if she planned to pay back even part of the money. The year before the barbecue, the year I turned 34, was when everything got worse in ways I didn't know were possible. My mother was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. It wasn't serious. It was completely manageable with diet and medication, but to hear my family, you'd think she'd been given 6 months to live. "Elena, she needs constant care," Carlos declared at a family meeting he convened at an expensive restaurant where, of course, I ended up paying the bill. "She can't be alone. One of us has to move in with her." Sophia immediately said, "I can't. I just bought my house. Plus I have my job." As if I didn't have a job. As if my life was less important than theirs. Carlos added, "I'm starting a new business. It's crucial to be available 24/7. Elena, you work from home half the time. It makes sense for it to be you." I didn't work from home for comfort. I worked from home because I'd taken a second job as a freelancer to pay off all the debts I'd accumulated keeping them afloat. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, "I can't move. I have my apartment, my routine, my commitments." My mother looked at me with those eyes she'd perfected over decades, eyes that conveyed disappointment, betrayal, and a pain so deep it made you feel like a monster for causing suffering simply by having boundaries. "I understand," she said softly. "I understand that your comfort is more important than your dying mother." "You're not dying," I tried to say. The doctor said, "Doctors don't know everything. A daughter would know. A good daughter would care." I ended up moving in with my mother. I gave up my apartment, that little refuge that had been mine, only mine for 5 years. I packed my life into boxes and moved back into my teenage bedroom, with its faded lavender walls and posters of bands that no longer existed. My mother didn't need constant care. She could walk, cook, drive. What she needed was an audience for her complaints, a servant for her whims, and a scapegoat for her unhappiness. Elena, I need you to go to the store. No, not that store, the other one, the one that's 30 minutes away. They have better tomatoes. Elena, why haven't you cleaned the bathroom? It's disgusting. What have you been thinking about all day? Elena, your brother called. He needs you to sign as a guarantor for a loan. It's just a formality. You're gonna do it, right? For the family. I signed up as guarantor, $15,000. 3 months later, Carlos stopped making payments. Collection agents started calling me. My credit score plummeted. I faced the possibility of losing what little savings I had left. When I confronted Carlos, he shrugged. The business didn't work out as expected. It's not my fault. Besides, you signed voluntarily. Nobody forced you. Technically, he was right. Nobody had put a gun on my head. They'd only used the much more effective weapon, my desperate need to belong to my own family. The months that followed were a descent into a dark place inside me that I didn't know existed. I developed insomnia. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning with my heart racing, calculating debts in my head. 37,200 in personal debts. 15,000 on the loan guarantee. 8,000 I still owed from early retirement withdrawal. $60,200 in liabilities that weren't mine, but that somehow had become my burden to carry. I started having panic attacks at work. My boss, a woman named Patricia, who was more of a mother to me in our brief interactions than my own mother had been in decades, called me into her office one Tuesday in March. Elena, I'm worried about you, she said gently. Your performance has declined. You're arriving late. You seem not present. What's going on? And for the first time in my adult life, I told someone outside my family the truth. Everything came out in a torrent. The money, the manipulation, the way every time I set a boundary, I became the bad guy, the way I'd lost my apartment, my autonomy, my sense of self. Patricia listened in silence. When I finished, she said something I'll never forget. Elena, none of that is love. Love doesn't destroy, love doesn't take and take until there's nothing left. What you're describing is financial and emotional abuse, and you need professional help to get out of it. She gave me the contact information for a therapist. I didn't call her, not for 3 more months. Because accepting that my family was abusing me meant accepting that all my suffering, all my sacrifices, all the love I'd poured into that bottomless pit had been for nothing. It meant accepting that it had never been the problem of me not giving enough. The problem was that they were never going to be satisfied, no matter how much I gave. That truth was too big, too devastating. So I kept going, I kept giving, I kept dying slowly inside while smiling outside, until the barbecue. July 16th was a perfect Saturday, cloudless blue sky, ideal temperature, the kind of day outdoor event organizers pray to the weather gods for. The neighborhood was organizing its annual summer barbecue big event where each family contributed food and everyone gathered in the community park to socialize. My mother had insisted we attend as a family. Carlos and Sophia would come too. It'll be good for the neighborhood to see what a close-knit family we are, she said, and I'd swallowed the hysterical laugh that threatened to escape. Close-knit family. I spent 2 days cooking. I made my famous meatloaf potato salad for 20 people and 3 dozen brownies, all out of my own pocket, of course. When I suggested we split the costs, my mother had looked at me as if I'd suggested we rob a bank. Families don't charge each other, Elena. What would the neighbors say? We arrived at the park at 2 in the afternoon. There were already about 50 people there, placing food on long tables under white tents. I knew many of them vaguely, Mrs. Henderson, who lived on the corner, Mr. Patel, who had 3 young children, the Morrisons, who had just moved in a year ago. What I didn't know was that my brother had arrived 2 hours earlier. What I didn't know was that he'd been planting a story. Everything was calm at first. I placed my food, greeted some neighbors, tried to look like a functional person instead of someone who was falling apart inside. Then Mrs. Henderson approached me with a strange expression on her face. "Elena, dear, can I talk to you for a moment?" I followed her to the side, away from the crowd. "Look, I don't know how to say this, but your brother has been telling people about the incident." My stomach sank. What incident? The one from the barbecue last month? The one with the laxatives. The world stopped. What? Mrs. Henderson looked uncomfortable. "Your brother told us that at the Sullivans' barbecue last month, you put laxatives in the food because you were angry with them. He said several people ended up in the hospital. That was very traumatic for everyone." The blood drained from my face? That's not true. I didn't even go to the Sullivans' barbecue. I was working that weekend. But even as I said the words, I saw the doubt in her eyes. The seed was already planted. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding," Mrs. Henderson said, but her tone said otherwise. She walked away quickly. I went straight to Carlos, who was by the grill, laughing with a group of men. "What did you tell people?" I hissed. He looked at me with manufactured innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about, sister." "The laxatives, the Sullivans' barbecue. Why are you saying I did that?" "Oh, that," he shrugged. "I was just sharing what happened. People deserve to know." "None of that happened." "You're lying." The men around him were looking at us now. Carlos lowered his voice, but said it loud enough for them to hear. "Elena, I know you've been under a lot of stress. I know things have been difficult, but denying what happened isn't going to help you. You need to take responsibility." It was brilliant, really, with those few words. He'd painted me as unstable, in denial, potentially dangerous. "You're lying," I repeated, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "Why would I do that?" he asked, eyes wide. "You're my sister. I love you. I'm just worried about you." I looked around. More people were staring at us now. I could see the whispers, the sideways glances. In the span of a 2-minute conversation, I'd become the neighborhood pariah. Then the symptoms started. Mrs. Patel ran toward the food tables, clutching her stomach. Then Mr. Morrison. Then 3 others. Within minutes, a dozen people were experiencing severe cramping, nausea, and running to the portable toilets. And they were all looking at me. "It was her!" I heard someone shout. "The crazy sister," Carlos warned us. Someone called 911. I watched with growing horror as 3 ambulances arrived at the park. Paramedics rushed from person to person. The chaos was total. People doubled over in pain, children crying, neighbors shouting accusations. And at the center of it all was me. "Arrest her," someone yelled. A police officer approached. "Miss, I'm gonna need you to come with me." "I didn't do anything," I said, and my voice finally broke. "I didn't do anything. I didn't even cook that. I didn't bring any of the food from the grill." But nobody was listening. I looked toward where my family stood. My mother was crying dramatically, being consoled by neighbors. Sophia was looking at me with what seemed like genuine disgust. And Carlos was looking at me with a small smile. In that moment, I understood this hadn't been an accident. This hadn't been a misunderstanding. This had been deliberate. Carlos had poisoned the food, probably the one he'd brought himself. He'd spread the rumor about me beforehand. He'd set me up perfectly to be the culprit. But why? The answer came like a lightning bolt of clarity. The loan, the $15,000 I was guarantor for. Collection agents had been pressuring me to take legal action against him. Last week, I'd finally told him that if he didn't start paying, I'd have to sue him. This was his response. If he destroyed me publicly, if he made me a social pariah, if he made me seem unstable and dangerous, any legal action I took against him would look like revenge from an unbalanced person. It was perfect, diabolical, but perfect. I spent 4 hours at the police station. They asked me questions again. Where had I bought the laxatives? Which food had I put in? Why had I done this? "I didn't do it," I repeated until my voice became hoarse. "I didn't do it." Eventually, after they analyzed my meatloaf, my potato salad, and my brownies and found nothing, they let me go. But the damage was done. By the time I got home to my mother's house, because I didn't even have a home of my own anymore, there were 32 text messages, some from furious neighbors, some from distant acquaintances who'd heard rumors, some from coworkers who'd seen Sophia's social media posts describing the traumatic incident caused by her unstable sister. My reputation, everything I'd built in this neighborhood during the years I'd lived here, was destroyed. I sat in my old room on that twin bed I'd had since I was 12, and I cried. I cried for all the lost years, for all the money I'd never see back, for all the times I'd put my family's needs above my own, for the woman I could have been if I hadn't spent all my life, energy trying to earn the love of people who were incapable of giving real love. And when the tears finally dried up, something in me dried up too. The part that had kept trying, the part that had kept believing, the part that had kept hoping. That night, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the therapist Patricia had recommended months ago. The second was to a lawyer specializing in financial fraud cases. The third part of my life was about to begin. Dr. Chen was a woman in her 50s with completely gray hair that she wore proudly and eyes that had seen enough human suffering not to be surprised by anything. Her office smelled of jasmine tea and had plants everywhere, as if she were trying to bring life to a space dedicated to talking about very dark places. "Tell me what brings you here," she said in our first session 2 days after the barbecue. And I told her everything. It took 3 complete sessions just to cover the surface, the money, the failed relationships, the constant moving of my boundaries, the way every no I tried to say transformed into yes under the pressure of family guilt. Elena, Dr. Chen said in our 4th session, "Have you ever heard the term family scapegoats?" I didn't stet. In dysfunctional families, she explained, there are often assigned roles. There's the golden child in your case, probably Carlos, who can do anything wrong and still be defended. There's the lost child, possibly Sophia, who stays on the sidelines but still receives the benefits of the system. And then there's the scapegoat, the person who gets blamed for all the family's problems, whose function is to make everyone else look better by comparison. She looked at me directly in the eyes. "Elena, you've been your family's scapegoat since you were a child, and what happened at the barbecue was just the most visible version of what they've been doing to you for years." Something inside me broke upon hearing that, or maybe it fixed itself. It's hard to distinguish between breaking and healing when both hurt so much. "How do I get out?" I asked. "How do I stop being that person?" First, she said, "You need to see the entire system for what it is, not just the individual incidents, but the pattern. And second, you need to start protecting yourself, legally, financially, and emotionally." That's where the lawyer came in. Samuel Rodriguez was a short, stocky man with a baritone voice and a reputation for being a pit bull in the courtroom. He specialized in family financial abuse cases, a niche of law I didn't know existed until I needed it. "I need to see all the documents," he said in our first meeting. "Every loan, every guarantee, every text or email where money was discussed. Everything." I spent a week compiling. It was worse than I thought. $57,000 in total. That was the amount I'd loaned or given or signed as guarantor for my family over the past 12 years. But as I reviewed the records, I started to notice something strange. There were discrepancies. My brother's loan that was supposedly for $12,000 for his first restaurant bank records showed he'd only deposited $8,000 into the business account. Where had the other $4,000 gone? Sophia's down payment money, $8,000, but when I requested a copy of her house closing public documents, I discovered the actual down payment had been only $5,000. Where were the other $3,000? There were holes everywhere, money I'd given for specific purposes, but that had disappeared to completely different places. "This is fraud," Samuel said simply. "They lied about what they needed the money for. Technically, you could file criminal charges." "I don't want them to go to jail," I said quickly. I just want my money back, and I want them to leave me alone. Then we're going to write a very, very serious letter. But before we could send that letter, I needed one more thing. I needed evidence from the barbecue. Because it turned out that the ambulances, the police, the complete chaos, everything had been documented. And in those documents, there was truth. It took 2 weeks and $400 in Freedom of Information fees, but I finally got the records from the barbecue incident. The analysis showed that it was Carlos's coleslaw, the one he'd brought made by him, that contained a significant amount of mineral oil and powdered laxative. Not enough to cause permanent harm, but enough to cause extreme gastrointestinal discomfort in everyone who ate it. He had poisoned his own food, on purpose, knowing that suspicion would fall on me because he'd spent the previous week telling neighbors his fabricated story. Samuel smiled when I showed him the documents. This, he said, is what we call home run. Not only do you have evidence of financial fraud, now you have evidence that he deliberately defamed you and endangered others to cover it up. Elena, your brother just handed us the case on a silver platter. What do we do now? Now, Samuel said, we write a letter that's going to change your life. Samuel advised me not to be present when the letter was delivered. Let me handle this professionally. If you're there, it'll become emotional, and we need this to stay in the legal, not personal. But I needed to be there. I needed to see their faces. We convened a family meeting. I told my mother we needed to discuss important financial matters. Carlos tried to cancel 3 times. Something in my tone must have alerted him, but finally we were all in my mother's living room on a Thursday evening. Sophia arrived late, of course, with a $6 Starbucks coffee in her hand. What is this? Carlos asked, looking at Samuel suspiciously. Who is he? This is my lawyer, I said calmly, and we're here to discuss the $57,000 you owe me. My mother immediately started with tears. How can you do this? How can you threaten your own family with lawyers? Quite easily, I responded, after years of being used as a personal bank. Samuel spread the documents on the coffee table. Bank records, emails, texts, receipts, the beautiful, terrible paper trail of my exploitation. Here's what's going to happen, Samuel said in a professional voice. Elena is suing for the full return of all unpaid loans, plus interest. She's also filing a defamation report for the barbecue incident, backed by forensic analysis, showing that the contaminated food was brought and prepared by Mr. Martinez here. Carlos paled. You can't prove. We can, Samuel interrupted, and we will, in court, publicly, where all the neighbors who were present that day will be able to see exactly who poisoned them and why. Additionally, I added, finding my voice, I'm filing criminal charges for fraud because you lied about what the money was for. You obtained money under false pretenses. That's a crime. Family doesn't do that to family, my mother shouted. You're right, I said, and my voice was firmer than I'd ever heard it. Family doesn't do that to family. Family doesn't exploit. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't destroy. But that's exactly what you've done for years, and it's over. Elena, Sophia said, and for the first time I heard real fear in her voice. Come on, we don't need to bring lawyers into this. We can work it out as family. No, I said, we can't, because working it out as families I give in, you face no consequences, and in 6 months we're back here with a new crisis that requires my money. Samuel pulled out 3 documents. You have 2 options. Option 1, you sign these agreements, committing to a payment plan to return the full amount, plus interest over the next 5 years. You also sign a no-contact agreement. No calls, no texts, no unannounced appearances. Elena needs space to heal. And if we don't sign, Carlos tried to sound defiant, but his voice trembled. Then we go to court. Everything becomes public. The records, the lies, the poisoning, everything. And honestly, Mr. Martinez, I doubt your reputation or your future business prospects will survive that. Silence filled the room. My mother looked at me with such hatred that I physically recoiled. You were always a selfish child, she hissed. From the day you were born, you only think about yourself. And something inside me, the last part that had been waiting for her love, her approval, her basic recognition of my humanity, finally died. Not with a whimper, with a sigh of relief. If taking care of myself makes me selfish, I said, then I'm selfish. Sign the papers, or we'll see you in court. Carlos signed first. His hand shook so much he could barely form his name. Then Sophia, who sobbed dramatically. My mother refused. I'm not going to sign something that says I can't talk to my own daughter. Fine, I said, gathering my things. See you in court, Mom. I turned to leave. Wait, it was my mother. I'll sign. She took the pen with trembling hands and scrawled her signature. You have 30 days to make the first payment, Samuel said. If any payment is missed, the entire agreement is void and we proceed with the full lawsuit. Understood. 3 heads nodded miserably. I walked out of that house, the house where I'd grown up, where I'd spent the last years as a prisoner, and I didn't look back. In my car, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. How do you feel? Samuel asked, who had followed me outside. Like I searched for words, like I just got out of a prison where I'd been my entire life, and someone just told me it had been open the whole time. Samuel smiled. That's exactly what happened. The door was always open, Elena. You just didn't know it. I drove to a hotel that night. I didn't want to be near my mother, didn't want to risk her showing up, didn't want anything to do with that house ever again. In the hotel room, I pulled out my laptop and started looking for apartments. It was time to build a new life. The first 3 months were the hardest. My family tried to contact me 17 times. Violating the agreement, each violation was documented and sent to Samuel. After the 3rd legal warning, they finally stopped. The money started coming in slowly, $500 a month from Carlos, $300 from Sophia, $200 from my mother. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was acknowledgement in the form of dollars and cents that what they'd done to me had been real and wrong. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a 1-bedroom studio in an old but well-maintained building with creaking wooden floors and a window overlooking a shared garden. It cost more than I could comfortably afford, but it was mine, only mine. The first month I slept on an air mattress on the floor. I didn't have money for furniture, not after legal fees and deposits, but it was the most beautiful air mattress I'd ever seen. Therapy with Dr. Chen intensified, twice a week, then 3 times when the panic attacks got worse. Because here's the thing about freeing yourself from an abusive situation. You don't feel free immediately. You feel terrified. My entire adult identity had been built around being the caregiver, the giver, the one who solved everyone else's problems. Without that role, who was I? You're Elena, Dr. Chen told me again. Just Elena, and that's enough. Elena without a function to fulfill. Elena without a role to play. Just Elena. It took months before I could start to believe it. At work, Patricia had kept me through all the chaos. When some coworkers had started gossiping about the barbecue incident, she called a meeting and set the record straight. She showed the analyses. She explained what had happened. Elena was the victim of a crime, she said simply. And if I hear anyone else treating her as anything, but we'll be having a very serious conversation about workplace harassment. I cried in her office that day. Why do you do this? I asked her. Why do you care? Because, she said, I also had a family that used me as a bank. It took me 45 years to let it go. And if I can help you do it in 15 years less, maybe everything I went through was worth something. Work became my refuge. I immersed myself in projects. I took on extra assignments. I volunteered for things I would normally have avoided. Not because I needed to prove something to my family, they no longer had a voice in my life, but because I needed to prove something to myself, that I was capable, that I was talented, that I'd been carrying other people all this time, and without that weight, I could fly. 6 months after the confrontation, Patricia called me into her office. We have a manager position opening up, she said. It means more responsibility, but also a 30% salary increase. I want you to apply for it. I don't know if I'm ready. Elena, she interrupted. You've been ready. You just haven't had the mental space to see it because you were spending all your energy keeping other people afloat. Apply for the job. I did. I got it. My first paycheck in the new position was $4,200 after taxes, more money than I'd seen in a single sum in years. I sat in my apartment looking at the number in my bank account and I cried. Not from sadness, from relief, from the realization that this money, this stability, this life was mine and nobody could take it from me. I bought secondhand furniture, a real bed, a couch, a dining table. Slowly, the apartment started to feel like a home. I adopted a cat from a shelter, a big grumpy orange cat named Nacho, who'd been in the shelter for 2 years because he wasn't friendly with people. Nacho and I understood each other perfectly. We'd both been hurt, we'd both lost trust, we both needed time to heal. In the evenings, he'd curled up in my lap while I read, and his constant purring felt like a lullaby for my damaged soul. It was Sophia who eventually broke. 8 months after the confrontation, I received a text message, a single line. I need to talk to you. It's about Mom and Carlos. Please. I forwarded the message to Samuel. Do I respond? Only if you want to, he replied. But if you do, do it in public and record the conversation, and I'll be at the next table. We met at a coffee shop. Sophia looked terrible. She'd lost weight, had dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes looked wrinkled. Thank you for coming, she said when I sat down. You have 10 minutes, I responded. Samuel was 2 tables back, pretending to read the newspaper. Sophia took a deep breath. You need to know something about the money, about all the years. Go ahead. It wasn't just for Carlos's businesses or my house. Well, some of it was, but she rubbed her face. Mom and Carlos had a plan. They've had it for years. My blood ran cold. What kind of plan? They knew that Dad had left you his debts in the will, but what you didn't know is that Mom and Carlos wrote that will. Well, they paid a lawyer to write it the way they wanted, and Dad signed it without really reading it. He was so sick at the end, the world tilted. Are you saying they forged Dad's will? Not exactly forged. Just manipulated a dying man into signing something he didn't fully understand. Tears were running down Sophia's face now, and they told me that if I kept it secret, I'd get my share of the house. So I did. God, Elena, I'm so sorry. I was 23 and scared and wanted the money, and I just... Why are you telling me this now? Because Carlos is doing it again. He's convinced Mom to change her will. She's going to leave everything to him, the house, her savings, everything. And I'm not going to get anything after everything I did. After all the lies I told. There it was. She wasn't here out of guilt or remorse. She was here because she was finally the one being scammed. And what do you want from me? Help. I want you to help me stop him. No. The word came out clearly and firm. Elena, please. No, I repeated. I spent years departing you, saving Carlos, saving Mom. And it cost me everything. My money, my mental health, my relationships, my self-esteem. I'm not going back into that system. But we're family. No, I said for the 3rd time. Family doesn't do what you did to me. Family doesn't conspire to rob their own members. You made your choice 8 years ago when you chose money over telling the truth. Now live with the consequences. I stood up to leave. I have proof. Sophia blurted out. Of the will, of the bank accounts, of everything. Emails between Mom and Carlos, planning it all. I've been saving it, just in case. I stopped. Why? Because I knew that eventually Carlos would betray me. He always betrays everyone. I just wanted to have something to protect myself. Samuel appeared on my shoulder. Miss Martinez, he said to Sophia, I'm Elena's lawyer. If you have evidence of fraud, I need to see it. It turned out Sophia had been documenting everything for years. She had screenshots of text conversations between my mother and Carlos discussing how much more we can get out of Elena before she figures it out. She had emails about the will, including one particularly damning one where my mother wrote, "The lawyer says we can draft this so Elena is responsible for all the debts but doesn't receive any assets. She's so dumbed she probably won't even check the legal documents properly." She had bank account records showing that of the money they'd asked me to lend, large portions had gone to vacations, gambling, and luxury purchases. Carlos's business hadn't even been real half the time, just fake accounts to justify asking for money. It was all there. Years and years of deliberate, calculated, and cruel manipulation. Samuel reviewed it all, his expression growing increasingly grim. This is He searched for words. "This is one of the clearest cases of conspiracy committing fraud I've seen. Elena, with this, you can not only recover all your money, you can challenge your father's will. You can get your legitimate share of the inheritance you should have received years ago." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow. Considering the value of the house when it was sold, the division of assets, inflation, and interest, you're probably looking at around $180,000 that should legitimately have been yours. The number was so big I couldn't process it. Additionally, Samuel continued, with this evidence of conspiracy, we could file criminal charges, not just civil, criminal. Your mother and Carlos could face prison time. I looked at Sophia, who was sitting there sobbing into her coffee. "What do you want?" I asked her. "Why are you really giving me this?" "I want immunity," she said quietly. "I was involved. I know. But I was the smallest fish. I just want to get out of this without going to jail. And I want Carlos to pay for what he did to both of us." "Did to both of us," I repeated slowly. "Sophia, you got $125,000 from the house. I got debts. We're not in the same situation." "I know, you're right. But Elena," she looked at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. "He's been manipulating me too, just in different ways. And I'm so tired of all the lies." I looked at Samuel. "What do you recommend?" "Take the evidence. File the lawsuit. As for criminal charges, that's your decision. But honestly, with this documentation, you could make them face real consequences." I spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about it. Did I want to send my mother and brother to prison? The honest answer was no, not because they didn't deserve it, they did, but because I needed to move forward with my life, not spend years trapped in a criminal trial. But I also couldn't just let it go. Finally, we arrived at a solution. Samuel filed the civil lawsuit, $195,000 in total, the stolen inheritance plus all unpaid loans, plus interest, plus punitive damages. Attached to the lawsuit was evidence, everything, posted in public records for anyone to see. And then we did something Carlos never expected. We informed every person he'd been trying to start businesses with, every potential investor, every partner, every bank. We sent them the documents. "We thought you should know who you're dealing with," the letter said. Within 2 weeks, 3 of Carlos's business deals fell through. His loan application was denied. The partners he'd been courting disappeared. His reputation, the one thing he'd cared about more than money, was destroyed. My mother blamed him. Carlos blamed her. Sophia told me in one of our occasional and extremely limited contacts that they'd turned on each other like animals. The system they'd built, where I was the common enemy who kept them united, had collapsed. And I felt nothing but relief. The case was settled out of court. My mother sold her house, the house where I'd grown up, the house where I'd spent that last miserable year of my life. From that sale and other assets, they paid me $152,000. It wasn't the full $195,000 we were asking for, but it was more money than I'd seen in my life. Carlos had to declare bankruptcy. Sophia sold her house and moved to a much smaller apartment. My mother ended up in a retirement apartment, not the luxurious one she'd planned, but a functional, modest one. They suffered consequences. Real, tangible, life-changing consequences. And the strangest part is that I didn't feel joy about it. I didn't feel satisfaction or revenge or anything I would have expected to feel. I just felt Peace. Peace from knowing I had finally stood up for my worth. Peace from knowing I would never be used again. Peace from knowing the chapter was closed. With the settlement money, I did 3 things. First, I paid every penny of debt I had, every loan, every credit card, every outstanding account. My credit score, which had been in hell for years, started to climb. Second, I put $50,000 in a retirement account. For the first time in my life, I had a financial future. Third, and most unlikely, I opened a business. Dr. Chen had suggested in one of our sessions that I consider doing something completely for yourself, something you never would have done when you were under your family's control. Like what? I'd asked. I don't know. What makes you happy, Elena? Not productive, not useful. Happy? I had to think about it for weeks. I'd spent so long defining my worth by what I could do for others that I'd forgotten what I enjoyed. Finally, I remembered baking. As a child, before everything got complicated, I used to spend hours in the kitchen making cookies, cakes, and bread. It was my escape, my meditation, my joy. So I opened a bakery. No, that's too grand. I started a home baking business, taking custom orders for events. I called it Second Chance, because that's what it was. For me, for my clients, many of whom had their own stories of starting over for everyone. The first months were terrifying. Every expense caused me anxiety. Every order felt like a huge risk. But slowly the business grew. People loved what I baked, not just because it tasted good, though it did, but because I put love into every product, love that was finally mine to give freely, not extracted from me under duress. At 6 months, I was making as much in the baking business as at my day job. At a year, I quit my corporate job to do it full time. Patricia cried when I gave my resignation. "I'm so proud of you," she said, "but I'm going to miss you so much." "You can still visit me," I told her, "and all birthday cakes forever are free." Eventually, the home bakery became a real store, a small shop in an artsy neighborhood where rent was reasonable and the community was warm. At the grand opening, I was terrified. What if nobody came? What if I'd made a terrible mistake? 50 people showed up, friends I'd made in the last year, Patricia and her colleagues, neighbors from my apartment building. Dr. Chen even stopped by, bringing flowers. There was no family, and that was okay. A strange thing started happening at the bakery. People started sharing their stories. An older man named George, who came every Tuesday for rye bread, eventually told me about how his adult children had scammed him out of his life savings. A young woman named Priya confided that she'd left her abusive family 2 years ago and still struggled with guilt. A college student named Marcus talked about how his family expected him to finance his siblings' college education while he worked 3 jobs. The bakery became more than a place to buy cookies. It became a refuge for people who were rebuilding their lives after family abuse. I didn't plan it that way, it just happened. Maybe there's something about the act of baking, the transformation of simple ingredients into something new that speaks to people who are transforming themselves. Or maybe we just needed a place where our stories were believed, where our pain was validated, where we didn't have to pretend that families always love correctly. I started hosting a weekly social hour, free coffee and pastries, open space, no judgment. People came, they shared, they healed, and so did I. There was a man who started coming to the bakery every Friday afternoon, late 30s, dark hair with premature gray strands, kind eyes behind black-framed glasses. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee and a slice of carrot cake. He always sat at the same table by the window. He always brought a book, but rarely read it. Mostly he watched people, listened to conversations, smiled at children pressing their faces against the display case. His name was Daniel. Not Daniel from my past, this one was different. Daniel Torres, a high school teacher who taught English literature and coached the debate team. We became friends slowly over weeks of brief conversations while I wiped tables or refilled coffee. "I like this place," he told me one day. "It feels safe." "Safe," I repeated. That's an interesting word to choose. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. My family was complicated too. I saw your story with the public documents and everything. I wanted to tell you that what you did was brave. My first instinct was to recoil. I hated that people knew my story, knew my shame. But then I really looked at him, and I saw there was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. Thank you, I said quietly. Want to get coffee sometime? He asked. Not here, where you're the owner and have to work. Just coffee, as people. I'd sworn off dating. I decided I was better alone, that relationships only brought pain. But there was something about the way he asked, no pressure, no expectations, just genuine interest that made me say yes. Our first date was a disaster. I was so nervous I spilled my coffee on my lap. He was so anxious to impress me that he talked nonstop for 20 minutes about literary theory before realizing he'd completely lost me. We laughed until we cried. Our second date was better. We walked through the park, talked about our families, both chaotic in different ways, about our fears, about our hopes. I'm not looking for someone to complete me, I told him. I'm already complete. I'm just looking for companionship, partnership. That, he said, is exactly what I need too. 3 months later, he asked if he could kiss me. 3 months after that, he asked if I wanted to meet his daughter from a previous marriage, an 8-year-old girl named Lily who loved dinosaurs and hated math. 6 months after that, he asked if I'd consider moving in together eventually, but no rush, no pressure, only when we both feel it's right. We moved in together a year after our first date. It wasn't perfect. No relationship is. We had disagreements. We had difficult days. There were moments when my past trauma made me overreact to small things, when I confused his genuine concern with control. But the difference was that we talked about it. We went to couples therapy. I'd learned the value of early intervention. We respected each other's boundaries. And when he made mistakes, because everyone made mistakes, he apologized, genuinely, without excuses or deflection. It was love, real love, the kind that holds instead of drowning. My mother tried to contact me one more time 2 years after the settlement. A handwritten letter delivered to my old apartment. I'd never given her my new address, but somehow she'd found it. The letter said, Elena, I hope you're well. I've been thinking a lot about you lately. Carlos says you have a bakery now. That's nice. You were always good at baking. Things have been difficult since you left. Carlos struggles. Sophia barely talks to me. I'm alone most of the time. I know I made mistakes. We all made mistakes. But you're my daughter. Family is family. Can't we leave the past in the past? Come to dinner sometime. Let's make peace. With love, Mom. There was no apology. There was no real acknowledgement of what she'd done. There was no understanding of why I'd left. Just a hope that I could forgive and forget without her having to change. I showed the letter to Dr. Chen. What do you want to do? She asked. Nothing, I said. And I was surprised by how sure my voice sounded. I don't want to do anything. That door is closed. No part of you wants reconciliation. Part of me wants the mother I never had, but I can't have that mother because that's not who she is. I can only have the mother who is. And that woman hurt me terribly repeatedly without remorse. I don't need that in my life. Dawn set you feel guilty? I used to, I said, guilt for setting boundaries, guilt for protecting myself, guilt for simply existing on my own terms. But I've worked too hard at healing to let that guilt drag me back to the place where I was dying. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't slam the door with dramatic finality or a final speech. I just let it go. I let it remain unanswered, unresolved, without the closure she probably expected. Because I learned that closure doesn't come from other people. It comes from yourself. I'm 38 years old now. The bakery is thriving. We have 3 employees, 2 of whom are also survivors of family abuse. We're a small, functional family of people who choose to heal. Daniel and I got married last year at a small ceremony in the garden behind the bakery. Patricia was my maid of honor. Lily was our flower girl and carried Nacho the cat down the aisle in a small decorated basket, which was ridiculous and perfect. We didn't invite my blood family. Not because I was being vengeful, simply because they weren't my family anymore. My family now is the one I chose. Patricia, who taught me that bosses can be mentors. Daniel, who shows me every day what healthy love looks like. Lily, who calls me bonus mom and brings me dandelion flowers from the park. The regular customers who share their lives with me. George, who 6 months ago finally filed charges against his children for elderly theft. Priya, who just graduated college and is going to medical school. Marcus, who sets boundaries now and comes to social hour to share his victories. This is my family. Chosen, earned, real. Financially, I'm stable for the first time in my adult life. The business pays the bills with a comfortable margin. I have savings, I have a retirement fund, I have an emergency account. It sounds simple, mundane even, but for someone who spent years in debt, always fearful of the next financial disaster, it's miraculous. Emotionally, I'm still healing. I'll probably always be healing. Trauma doesn't completely disappear, but I learned to live with it, not to let it define every decision. I still go to therapy, I still have bad days, I still sometimes hear my mother's voice in my head telling me I'm selfish, ungrateful, unlovable. But now I also hear other voices. Dr. Chen's voice, Patricia's voice, Daniel's voice, and increasingly my own voice. That voice says, you are enough, you deserve love, you deserve respect, you deserve a life that doesn't consume you alive. 3 weeks ago, I was closing the bakery after a particularly busy day. Lily was with me, helping clean the tables, well, helping the way a 10-year-old does, which means mostly eating the cookie crumbs she found. Elena, she said suddenly, do you ever wish your mom was here? It was a question I'd never been asked before. Adults avoided the subject, but kids are direct. Sometimes I said honestly, I miss the idea of having a mother, but I don't miss the person who was my mother, if that makes sense. Lily nodded seriously, like when I miss my hamster that died, but I don't miss cleaning his cage. I laughed. Something like that. Yes. My teacher said that family is about who chooses you and who you choose, not just about blood. Your teacher is very wise. Does that mean you're my real family, even without blood? Something in my chest tightened. Yes, sweetie, that means we're real family. She smiled, showing where her front tooth was missing, and went back to her cleaning. And I realized this is it. This is what all the pain was for. To get to this moment, standing in my own bakery with a child I choose to love and who chooses me back, building something real and beautiful from the rubble of what my life was supposed to be. The trauma didn't disappear, but it transformed me into someone capable of building something better. If you're reading this and you see yourself in my story, if you're the guarantor, the caregiver, the problem solver, the one who always says yes, I want you to know something. It's not too late. You're not selfish for wanting your life back. You're not bad at setting boundaries. You're not breaking your family. They were already broken, and you're just stopping carrying the pieces. It takes years. Sometimes the path to freedom isn't quick or easy. There will be days when you want to give up, go back, settle for crumbs of affection because at least it's something familiar. But on the other side of that hard work, on the other side of the difficult conversations and the lawsuits and the boundaries and the hours of therapy crying, there's life. Real life. Your life. Life that doesn't belong to anyone else. And it's worth every tear. It's been 5 years now since the barbecue that changed everything. I opened a second bakery location. I wrote a book about my experience that was published last year. It wasn't a bestseller, but the letters I received from readers who found the courage to leave, to heal, to live, were worth more than any bestseller list. Carlos declared bankruptcy again. I heard through Sophia, with whom I have very limited contact every 6 months or so, that he's working a minimum wage job and living in a 1-bedroom apartment. My mother lives with a cousin in another state. She never contacted me again. Sophia is in therapy. She's trying to undo the conditioning to learn to be a person outside the dysfunctional family system. We're not close, probably never will be, but I hope she finds her peace. I found mine. It's in the smell of bread baking at 5 in the morning. It's in the coffee Daniel puts me in bed on Sundays. It's in conversations with Lily about dinosaurs and math and what it means to be brave. It's in the stories customers share, in the whispered thank you, in each small victory of healing. It's in knowing that the money in my bank account is mine, earned cleanly, without guilt or obligation. It's in waking up every morning without that weight of dread, wondering what family crisis will need my attention, my money, my soul. It's in freedom to say no. In the freedom to say yes only when I really want to say yes. In freedom to simply, sometimes I still dream about the barbecue, but in my dreams now, I'm not the one being accused. I'm the one who is walking away. I walk away from the smoke and the chaos and the accusations. I walk towards something bright and clean and completely mine. And when I wake up, I realize it's not just a dream, it's my life. And it's beautiful